Hey, Walter Sorrells back with more tips for the knife maker. Today, ancient meets modern in some Japanese sword fittings. So today I'm going to be doing a little ancient meets modern project. Honestly, somewhat of an experiment. In the process, I'll be showing off the new laser engraver made by Longer. I've been doing a bunch of laser related projects over the past few months, so I've covered some of the basic ground in previous videos. General information about laser engravers, how they work, and the kinds of materials that they'll work on. So today I'll be focusing less on the ins and outs of laser engraving and more on the knife making project. Well, projects actually. Today I'll be making two tsubas or Japanese sword guards, which I'll decorate using the Longer Ray5 20-watt laser. By the way, yes, this is a sponsored video, so just bear that in mind as we go. Okay, so let me very briefly go over what laser engravers are if you're not familiar with them. Laser engravers of this type use diode lasers to engrave or cut a variety of materials. The Longer will cut wood up to and well over ½ an inch depending on the type of wood, but as we'll show today, it also engraves steel very effectively. Most diode lasers, including the Longer, won't do squat to non-ferrous metals though, copper, brass, aluminum, that sort of thing. Basically, laser engravers work like 3D printers, CNC machines, etc. Your computer sends an image to the engraver, and depending on how you set it up, how fast the head moves, and how powerful you set the laser, it'll engrave or cut the material you're working with. You have a rail system, a couple of stepper motors, a controller, and a gantry that transports the laser head. That's about it. The other thing you need in order to make them work is a computer and some software. I use software called Lightburn, which is pretty much the standard for driving laser engravers. The Longer is a fairly lightly built engraver with a 750 by 750 millimeter print area. At around $700 to $800 US at the time of this video, it's pretty affordable compared to some of the other 20-watt lasers out there. Once you get it assembled and plug it into Lightroom, everything works pretty well. I never ran into any weird errors, and the engraver worked flawlessly from the get-go, which I can't necessarily say for all laser engravers I've tried. The Longer has a nice little LED control screen, a feature that a lot of its competitors don't have. I mainly use it to home the machine before each use, but compared to a lot of other similar machines, this gives you a fair amount of onboard control. The Longer also has limit switches, which are useful both for homing and for avoiding head crashes. The rig is available with a rotary device for engraving on items like mugs and other curved surfaces, as well as an air assist, which is particularly useful when cutting wood. Okay, let's get cracking on the real purpose of this video, making a pair of sword guards. Obviously, these are not going to be in the slightest bit traditional in any respect. We're just having fun with the form while making a fully functional fitting that would work on anything from a modern Chinese reproduction to an ancient Kodo antique. The first one will be made from mild steel, while the second will be made from a piece of centuries-old wrought iron. The wrought iron came from a decommissioned water tower and isn't vaguely flat, so I'll begin by flattening it in the forge. This is a really cool material. For those of you who don't know much about it, wrought iron was made by a very labor and skill-intensive process known as puddling that predates all the giant ladles full of molten steel that we associate with modern steel making. In this case, it has a really deeply pitted side, the interior of the water tower, I guess, which we're going to use as a design element. First, though, I'll smooth and flatten the piece. I'm using a surface grinder, but I could just as easily have done it on a belt grinder. As you can see, we're keeping these defects on the back side. Next step is to shape the tsuba. This is something that can be done with a drill and a file and maybe a hacksaw. You know, that's how I did it for over a decade. Or, if you have a CNC machine like I do, you can save yourself the agony of all that boring filing and just mill it out. Same goes for forming it into a circle. I could shape this on a belt grinder, but again, a trained monkey could do that part of the job, and at a certain point in life, I just decided to stop doing as much of the trained monkey part of my work as possible. I could make this a perfect circle, but I'm leaving a little side cut just for visual interest. Despite all the newfangled elements here, I want it to have some organic feeling to it. So on the first one, I'm mainly just testing the process, so in order to do that, I'll filch some designs from antique Japanese woodblock prints. Lightburn has a pretty effective trace function, which allows you to import an image and then extract most of the lines, turning it into vector art, something that laser engravers are very efficient at printing. I'll show the process here with a woodblock print that I actually own, and then later on I'll use a different one for the actual tsuba. This, of course, is the most famous woodblock print of all time, Hokusai's The Great Wave off of Kanagawa. So once I've captured the design, I'll shrink it down to the exact size of the tsuba blank. One thing I'm not wild about on the longer machine is that the method for setting the focus on the laser is pretty clunky. Most competitor machines have a little standoff that allows you to set the distance pretty easily. In this case, you have to put this little block in there to measure the correct distance for the laser. It's not a big thing, but just sort of clunky. And now we're ready to print. You can print all kinds of different ways, from line art to various dot matrix type approaches, but for this, line art is what we want. Quick note on a little trick I like to use. In Lightburn, you can create layers in your design. If you've ever used Photoshop, it works very similarly. This allows you to have a bunch of design elements which you can give different speed and power recipes to. There are a ton of applications for this, but basically what you're doing is combining engraving and cutting in the same process. So some places you might want to really cut deeply or burn deeply, and some other places you want something pretty superficial, and you can combine them all into one workpiece. In this case, I'll use the feature to make an outline of the object I'm engraving that I lightly burn into a piece of paper. You could also use tape or something like that I place on my base. Then I have this outline to use as a guide for placing my piece. A handle fitting, a particular knife blade, or in this case, a sword guard on the base. And then the main engraving will go exactly and precisely where I want it. When it's complete, there's a little mist of iron oxide around the engraving, but some oil and elbow grease will quickly remove it, leaving solid black lines. A similar process on the other side. Look, I don't consider this to be particularly artistic. I'm just copying some old designs. So on the next tsuba, the wrought iron one, I'll actually draw my own design. So for that one, I sort of audition a bunch of approaches, which mostly suck, until I get something I like. Then I'll draw it more carefully, ink the drawing, then erase the sketch. What's left is a clean line drawing that will be easily traced by Lightburn. Before we head back to the laser engraver, let me make a quick point here. I've done more extensive safety notes in my earlier videos about lasers, but the main point here is just be careful. Always, always, always wear safety glasses because these things can literally blind you, and be aware that they can also set your house on fire and create poisonous fumes, so don't fool around with them. Anyway, here we go. On the other side, I'll do a set of claws. Again, I'm sort of experimenting here, so the claws really didn't come out that great, but it was a fun experiment. Now I'm going to patinate the fittings by salt bluing them. I've got other videos that go into tons of detail about salt bluing, so I'm not going to go nuts on explaining it, but here's what happens. I've heated the bluing salts to a molten state, then I'll dredge the sword guard in the hot bluing salts, which are up around 650 degrees Fahrenheit. You can use this to produce a wide variety of colors, and as you'll see, I'll do different colors for each tsuba. So here's how the first one came out. Next, I'll turn to the wrought iron tsuba. In this case, I'm actually going to etch it before I go into the bluing salts. The purpose of this is to bring out some of the detail in the wrought iron. Now we're going to go ahead and dredge that in the bluing salts. So this process not only gives them cool colors, but it also creates an oxide layer that will inhibit rusting. Anytime you use a bluing process like this to carbon steels, you still want to keep them oiled, but they won't rust like normal bare steel would. And here's our final result. Now, like I said, these are really just kind of tests for me to see how this process works out, but as you can see, these are techniques that could be used for pretty simple knives, for fancy art pieces, or even just to mark serial numbers or logos on knives, tools, guns, pretty much anything that's made out of steel. If you're looking for something new to kind of spark your knife making imagination or move your knife making in a different direction, a laser engraver like this 20-watt longer might just be the thing for you. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe and make sure that you click on that bell so you get notified of all the latest videos. Want to buy a knife from me? Check out my modern blades at tacticsarmory.com. Digging the channel? You can support our video making efforts on Patreon. You know, I've been banging away on these videos for like 10 years, so I hope you'll show some love for all that hard work. Link in the cards and descriptions. Finally, if you're interested in making Japanese swords, check out my full line of Japanese sword videos where I show how to forge Japanese swords as well as how to polish them and how to make fittings, handles, and scabbards. WalterSorrellsBlades.com.